Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the salt-lashed corridors of a creaking galleon, the planks beneath your bare feet damp with spray and brine. Lanterns sway overhead, casting halos on faces as rough as the sea itself, scarred, sunburned, half smiling as they pass a dented flask from hand to hand. The smell of tar and stale rum mixes in the air, and you can almost taste the hunger for something bigger than life ashore. You press your palm to the rail and feel it shudder. Somewhere below deck, a cannonball is cradled in straw, ready for the next unannounced visitor. A deckhand with a braided beard claps you on the shoulder like you're part of the gang, though you probably won't survive this voyage. Your pulse is quick, but there's no turning back now. You've signed on with the real Buccaneers, the ones who made empires tremble and histories wobble between villainy and freedom. So before we drift any deeper, if this hushed little corner brings you even a flicker of calm, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right in your chest. Go on, let me know where you're listening from and what hour the tide finds you. Now, breathe slow, let the weight fall off your shoulders, and sink with me into tonight's slow unravelling of the past, right here on Historian's Diary. The ship groans, easing westward into the copper glow of sunrise. You trudge across the deck, weaving among coils of rope and wooden barrels stamped with Spanish royal seals. Ironic, considering this entire cargo was liberated just 2 nights ago. No one calls it stealing, they call it reclaiming, and maybe, if you squint your conscience into a small enough corner, you can almost believe it. Your first days aboard are a blur of chores and confusion, hauling lines, scrubbing planks stained with fish guts, learning who you can trust and who might slip a blade between your ribs when no one's watching. You discover quickly that pirate life is less about swagger and more about sweat, less about shouting orders and more about surviving on hardtack biscuits full of weevils. When the sun bakes the deck until it feels like your soles will blister off, a crewman named Josiah tells you how he ended up here. He deserted a plantation after a beating, traded his last coins for a spot on this ship, and has been outrunning the law ever since. He has one eye and the kind of grin that suggests he knows something you don't, probably where the best rum is stashed. At night you curl into a hammock below decks, where the shadows thicken between the beams. Voices drift around you, telling tales of gold-laden galleons and ports where no tacksman dares follow. You realise with a little shiver that some of these stories are true. The Caribbean has become a kind of chessboard, the Spanish Main its treasure-lined path, and these men the unpredictable hands that tip the pieces. A few days in, you watch as the captain, whose real name no one speaks, strides the deck in a long coat that used to belong to some unfortunate Navy officer. He's the closest thing to a king here, though he insists he's no tyrant. His word is final, but the crew has voted him their leader. In the darkness, by lantern glow, you've seen them pass around the Articles of Agreement, a list of rights, shares, and punishments that binds them together. There's a curious fairness to it. Even a raw recruit like you is promised a portion of any plunder. You start to understand why men abandon safe lives for this. It isn't just the loot, though no one minds a chest of silver. It's the taste of freedom, as raw and salty as the wind. Freedom from taxes, from kings, from the clamour of priests insisting your soul is already damned. Here, your worth is measured by your hands and your nerve, and maybe, if you survive long enough, you'll gather a legend of your own. One morning, a lookout calls down that he's spotted a sail on the horizon. The mood shifts instantly. Voices hush, hands fly to weapons, and your heart beats in your throat. The captain lifts his spyglass, eyes glinting. "She's heavy," he murmurs. "Spanish, if I had to guess." The rigging shivers as the ship adjusts course. No one speaks above a whisper. You taste metal on your tongue, a trick of nerves. As the enemy draws closer, the sun climbs higher, making it impossible to hide. This is no polite naval engagement. If you catch her, it will be a brawl in the spray and smoke, and you'll be lucky to crawl away breathing. A seasoned gunner with a tattoo of a serpent winding up his arm lays out powder charges like a ritual. "First time?" he asks, nodding to your pale face. You try to reply, but your mouth is too dry. He laughs, a warm rasp. Don't worry, if you die, you won't have to scrub the deck anymore. There's the first joke of many, one that lands with the gentle cruelty pirates seem to enjoy. You force yourself to grin back. The wind picks up, filling the sails, and the chase begins. Hours pass in a blur of tension and adrenaline. The Spanish ship strains to outrun you, but she's burdened by the weight of her own fortune. Iron chests, silver coins, crates of cacao bound for the royal coffers. You can almost pity the sailors aboard her, caught in the same merciless game. Almost. When the first shot thunders out, it feels less like an attack and more like a declaration. You've stepped beyond the pale. No going back to shore life now. The cannonball splinters across the enemy's stern. Cheers rise around you, ragged and fierce. And in that moment, when the smoke drifts away and the sea glitters with the promise of more than survival, you feel it. The raw, unfiltered rush of being alive, unclaimed and unbowed. Whether history will call you pirate or freedom fighter doesn't matter yet. You have salt air in your lungs and a future no king awake. You're already elbows deep in the rituals that make a pirate ship function, some as practical as patching sails, some as ceremonial as daubing red paint onto the flag that will soon flap from the mainmast. It isn't just any flag. As you help unroll the canvas, you see the bones and skulls etched in crude lines. The Jolly Roger, you think, though the men don't always call it that. Sometimes it's simply the Black. To fly it is to announce your intentions to the world, no quarter given. Surrender and you might survive. Resist and you're fair game for the cutlasses. The paint-stained helmsman, he calls himself Barebones, tells you the symbols matter more than you'd guess. Red meant no mercy. Black meant negotiations were possible, though everyone knows the difference is academic if the crew is in a mood. And if they raise the hourglass, it signals time running out. You wonder who dreamed up this morbid code, and how many captains used it to buy a terrified moment's advantage. You spot the ship's articles again, posted near the captain's cabin door. They're scrawled in spidery ink, and Barebones taps the parchment with a stubby finger, reminding you, every man aboard had to swear to these, even you. Here, law comes in its own shape. A pirate code isn't some fanciful story. It's a real, enforceable contract. Rules about shares of treasure, compensation for lost limbs, and punishment for theft among your own. Everyone agrees that cheating your brothers earns you a worse fate than merely losing your life. A man caught hoarding gold can be marooned or worse. Your head swims as you read the fines for drunkenness during battle. Fair, given that the rum rations are legendary. And the clear statement that all crew have a voice in big decisions. A democracy of rogues, you think. Though that sounds almost too dignified for the bunch snoring under tarps and dreaming of coin. In the lull before the next pursuit, you find yourself sitting cross-legged on the deck, mending a torn flag under the indifferent gaze of the sea. Another pirate, this one with a thin silver hoop in his ear and a laugh like a cracked bell, leans over and mutters, "You know, it's all for show. They see this flag, they surrender. Makes it easier." But there's a glint in his eyes that says he enjoys the theatre as much as the plunder. And maybe, in a world where kings drape themselves in symbols, sceptres, crowns, crucifixes, these outlaws simply forge their own. A sudden squall interrupts your thoughts, ripping the flag from your hands. You scramble after it, rain pelting your face as if the sky itself disapproves. The cloth snaps against the rail, finally caught by the helmsman's practiced hand. He shakes his head with a grin. "Can't let it go," he says. "That rag's worth more than gold in the right moment." You nod, breathless. It hits you then how much power a piece of fabric can wield, how it can freeze a captain's heart or make a merchant's hands tremble as he fumbles for a white surrender pennant. When the rain eases, the captain gathers everyone on deck. He holds the flag high, the black and bone banner dripping water, and swears by it that tomorrow you'll take another prize. The crew answers with a ragged cheer, voices cracked and hungry. As dusk creeps over the rigging, you glimpse other symbols in play. Carved charms nailed to the mast to ward off ill luck. a Spanish medallion strung around a gunner's neck, a reminder of the last ship he fought, even a rosary incongruous among the blasphemy dangling near the hatch. You start to see the pattern, how flags and codes and half-whispered oaths shape the invisible boundaries between chaos and order. Out here, far from any courthouse, these symbols are the only law you have. That night, when the deck is quiet except for the gulls screaming over the waves, you hear a story from an older sailor with inked forearms. He swears he once watched an entire Spanish convoy surrender without a shot fired, just because a notorious flag rose over the horizon. They knew who we were, he says, voice low and reverent. They knew we kept our word. And what was that word, you ask, half afraid of the answer? He pauses, eyes bright in the lantern glow. That we'd let them live if they handed it all over. He doesn't say what happened to the ones who refused. He doesn't have to. A silence falls, heavy as wet canvas. You shift in your hammock later, the salt sticking to your skin, and think about how easily fear becomes currency, and how you're now part of this grim economy. But dawn is coming, and with it, a chance to fly your own symbols high, whatever that means in this watery preparations. Barrels of powder lashed down, fresh water casks inspected, every scrap of sail checked for weakness. A hush hangs over the men, a hush that feels different from fear. It's anticipation, almost reverence. You step to the rail, squinting across the waves, and try to imagine the wealth that passed through these lanes. Silver and spices, cocoa and cochineal, fortunes so enormous they reshaped empires. It doesn't take long for the first tales to reach your ears. Over a breakfast of salt pork and stale bread, a wiry old pirate with no teeth recounts how the Spanish packed treasure onto galleons in Veracruz and Cartagena. These ships crawled north, hugging the coast before striking for Havana, escorted by armed vessels bristling with guns. Sometimes, he says, the Buccaneers would wait for days in hidden coves, just to catch the convoy in a moment of weakness. Like crocodiles in the mangroves, he rasps, waiting for a hoof to slip. You laugh, though you can't shake the picture, a hidden predator's patience, the quiet before the kill. The Spanish Main is a place that rewards such cunning, and punishes the unprepared with a rope or a bullet. By mid-morning, you spot a coastline to starboard, a green fringe above the surf. The helmsman identifies it as the Mosquito Coast, where English privateers once traded with indigenous allies. Somewhere out there, settlements still smoulder with the memory of raids. You wonder whether those villagers thought of the pirates as devils or deliverers. That's the uncomfortable truth. For every golden legend about these buccaneers, there's a matching story of villages burned, captives taken, and fields left in ashes. History paints them as both villains and folk heroes, sometimes in the same sentence. A gunner lounging beside you scratches his beard and says, "You know, the Spanish call this El Golfo de Honduras, but to us it's just the highway." He gestures broadly at the expanse of blue. A highway lined with clumsy fat ducks just begging to be plucked. The way he says it, cheerful, almost affectionate, makes you shiver. He's talking about ships full of terrified sailors, but out here, empathy is a luxury you can't always afford. Noon brings a squall so sudden it seems summoned by your misgivings. The sails billow and snap as rain flattens the sea, drumming hard enough to make your ears ring. You stagger below deck, bracing against the beams. It's a cleansing, the cook tells you, a rinse before the next bloody chapter. By the time the clouds scud west, the lookout is already pointing out new specks on the horizon. "Convoy," he says, excitement sparking through his voice. 3 ships moving slow. You rush topside, heart thrumming. The captain appears beside you, soaked to the skin but smiling that peculiar, unreadable smile. "Ready yourself," he murmurs. "This is why you signed on." He's right. In this moment, every hardship, the sour water, the cramped hammock, the constant threat of betrayal, seems a fair price for this raw rush. A cheer goes up as the helmsman orders a change of course. Your ship slips into pursuit, hugging the squalls for cover. Men haul ropes in practiced rhythm, their voices weaving an eerie chant. You think again of crocodiles lurking in reeds. Hours pass in tense proximity. The convoy grows larger in your spyglass, a Spanish galleon in the lead, two smaller escorts bristling with cannon. The captain orders the black flag raised, not yet the red, not yet the hourglass. You glimpse the white skull unfurling against the sky, and your pulse skips. From this distance, you imagine the Spanish lookouts sounding alarms. Maybe they're fumbling for their crucifixes. Maybe they're trying to remember which pirate flags promise mercy and which do not. Twilight falls like a curtain over the sea, wrapping the ships in gloom. You're close enough now to see figures on the decks ahead, tiny shadows moving frantically. The captain glances at you, his face illuminated by the lantern he carries. "The Spanish Main," he says quietly, "is the world's richest coffin. Let's see who climbs in tonight." You swallow hard, wondering whether he includes your own ship in that calculation. When darkness swallows everything but the lanterns, the gunners prepare for a running fight. You catch a glimpse of the first cannonball, perfectly round like an iron plum. A reminder that all the grand ideas, liberty, defiance, equality, still end in smoke and splinters. One of the men slaps your back and says, "Just remember, if it all goes wrong, at least you won't have to scrub pots anymore." There's your joke, a grim little comfort that somehow helps. Then comes the signal, a single flare soaring up and bursting in blue. The captain's voice is low but certain. Let's see what they're made of. In the final moments before you close the distance, you can't help thinking how much history pivots on men chasing treasure down this very stretch of water. How these same waves have carried glory, ruin, and every shade between. Whatever tomorrow brings, you're here now, bound to this reckless hunt along the Spanish Main, where fortune and oblivion sail in tandem, finds you ankle deep in the debris of battle. Splintered planks, a cracked spar, the acrid stench of burned powder clinging to every thread of your clothing. But the Spanish ship has struck her colours. She lies wallowing in the swell, her decks littered with the exhausted, the wounded, and the newly impoverished. You watch as your captain, whose name you still don't dare say aloud, strides across the makeshift boarding planks with a ledger tucked under one arm. It feels absurdly bureaucratic. A man in a ragged coat and stolen boots, taking careful notes of seized crates and confiscated coin. He does it because it's part of the code, the pirate democracy that sounds almost civilized when you're not staring into the wide eyes of defeated men. Around you, the crew divides spoils with startling precision. First, they set aside the agreed shares for the ship's repair fund, then a portion for compensation if anyone was maimed in the fight. Only after these deductions does the real dividing begin. You watch the coins stack up, glittering under the sun like miniature promises of freedom. A wiry deckhand with a sun-scarred neck nudges you and says, "This is why we vote, friend." He holds up a scrap of parchment, the articles you've memorized by now. No captain gets more than his due. No man goes hungry while another counts gold. He says it with pride, and for a moment you almost believe you've joined something nobler than simple thievery. A floating republic, a brotherhood without kings or landlords. But then you glimpse a young Spanish sailor weeping into his hands while one of your mates cuts away a locket from around his neck. That's when you remember the other side of this coin. For every cheer and jest aboard your ship, there is a mirror of grief somewhere else. Still, rules are rules. The captain steps forward, voice calm and unhurried, and reads each man's portion aloud. When he calls your name, a warm flush creeps up your throat. It feels like a rite of passage, your first earned share. You pocket the coins, half expecting them to vanish in a puff of guilt. Later that day, as the Spanish prisoners are set adrift in a small launch, provisioned just enough to reach land, you lean against the rail and wonder what stories they'll tell when they finally stagger ashore. Will they call you monsters, or simply the inevitable price of empire? A familiar voice interrupts your brooding. It's the gunner with the serpent tattoo, grinning under a mop of powder-blackened hair. "You thinking too much," he says, offering a battered cup of rum. "Bad habit." He leans close and lowers his voice. A ship is only as strong as its code. No code, no order. No order, no survival. You realise he's right. For all their ruthlessness, these men cling to their rules as fiercely as any navy, maybe more. The next evening, you sit in the candlelit mess, surrounded by faces ruddy with triumph and drink. A quartermaster stands on a barrel to recite the portions again, every man verifying that no one has been cheated. Someone makes a toast. "To the Articles!" they shout, "and to no king but our own." The cheer that follows rattles the beams overhead, and you feel it in your bones. This ragtag democracy, this community built on shared peril, is more binding than any royal charter. It's flawed and violent and shot through with contradictions, but in its own savage way it is fair. The next morning dawns bright and hot. The captain calls everyone to the quarterdeck to settle the matter of injuries. One man lost a finger, another a chunk of ear. According to the articles, they're owed extra coin. The ship's carpenter, who also serves as surgeon, solemnly hands them their shares in small leather pouches. It's a moment of grim decency in a world that otherwise offers none. You can't help admiring the logic. If you must risk your life to seize fortune, you should at least be compensated when fortune bites back. Once the accounts are squared, the captain gathers you all and reads the final item on the parchment. If any man is dissatisfied with his share or the leadership, he may speak now. No one does. The hush that follows is not fear, it's consent. For all the stories of backstabbing pirates, you realise the only thing that keeps this floating republic afloat is the collective agreement to respect the code. As the crew disperses, the helmsman claps you on the shoulder. "First payday's always a shock," he says, laughing. "Now you're one of us for real." A breeze stirs the freshly mended black flag overhead, and you find yourself smiling. Not because you've grown callous to the cost, but because you've learned that even in a life built on plunder, some principles hold fast. You turn to help stow the cargo, and the coins in your pocket jingle, a reminder that here, before sunrise, you stand watch at the bow, salt spray flicking your face as the sea rolls beneath the hull. The air is soft, almost tender, and for the first time you wonder if you've begun to love this savage life. Behind you, the deck is still, the crew sprawled in hammocks or curled up wherever exhaustion found them. The black flag droops, limp against the mast, resting between declarations of war. As dawn teases the waves with pale light, you think about the question that keeps surfacing like a half-submerged log. Are you thieves, or something closer to rebels? The line is blurrier than you expected. When the Spanish Empire first planted its banners here, it claimed everything it could see. Lands, people, oceans, all wealth, by royal decree, was theirs. But for men like your shipmates, those royal claims were as thin as the parchment they were written on. Below decks, you find the quartermaster recording each man's mark in a ledger, ensuring everyone's share is tallied fairly. A makeshift democracy scribbled in ink. In that small lamplit space, it's hard not to see a strange nobility in it. Criminal, yes, but a nobility all the same. As you help pass out rations, a veteran pirate with a scarred cheek and a broken nose tells you how he once served in the Navy. 50 lashes for stealing a crust of bread, he mutters. 2 shillings a month if they bothered to pay you, he spits into the bilge. Out here, we take what we need, and we share it fair. His words hang in the air. This, you realise, is the heart of the question. Were they criminals only because the crown said so? If a king steals by law, and a pirate steals by force, is the difference really so great? Your answer shifts every time you look at the Spanish prisoner's haunted eyes. But when you look at your own ship's rules, how the captain must answer to the crew, how no man is above another, you see a freedom no navy ever allowed. After breakfast, the captain calls for a council. Everyone gathers, cross-legged on the deck, to debate the next course. Someone suggests a run north to intercept a convoy. Another proposes stopping at Tortuga to refit. You're struck again by the absurd contrast. A society of outlaws arguing politely over strategy, voting by a show of hands. It's not some savage free-for-all. It's a floating republic governed by agreement no matter how rough the edges. When the vote ends, the decision is clear. You'll head north for richer prey. The captain doesn't argue. He just nods and orders the helmsman to lay in the course. As the ship turns, you climb the rigging to furl a sail. From up here, the deck looks small, a handful of men daring to defy entire empires. The horizon is a promise and a threat. Hours later, you find yourself mending a coil of rope beside the same scar-faced veteran. He leans in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know why the governors hate us more than murderers?" he asks. "Because we prove you can live without their permission." He taps the deck. "This plank, this flag, these articles, that's all the authority we need." His grin is lopsided, but there's no madness in it, just conviction. That night, as the stars crawl overhead, you lie in your hammock, turning his words over in your mind. You think about the Navy ships you've seen, their decks scrubbed spotless, their cannons polished. You think about their officers, born to command because some ancestor curried favour with a monarch. And you think about this ship where your worth depends not on birth but on nerve. A whisper of wind shifts the lantern light and you smile despite yourself. Perhaps it's simpler than you thought. Here, you get a vote, you get a share, you get to decide. In the dark, you hear a chuckle from a nearby hammock. "Don't go romantic on us," someone mutters. "We're still thieves." But the grin on your face doesn't fade, because even thieves can crave justice. Even pirates can dream of a world where no man bows without choosing to. And in that dream, for better or worse, your ship is already slipping behind a headland, prow angled toward a merchant convoy rumoured to be stuffed with silver and cacao. The lookout calls the sighting at mid-morning. 3 ships, fat and slow, crawling along under Spanish colours. You feel your pulse kick in your throat as the captain lifts his spyglass. "Too far to catch by speed," he mutters, "so we'll have to use our wits." Which is how you find yourself crouched behind a stack of barrels with half the crew, waiting for the galleons to close the gap. The plan is simple in theory and madness in execution. A sudden broadside, grapples thrown, boarding parties swarming before the convoy's escorts can react. You flex your hands on the rail, trying not to imagine the dozen ways this could end badly. A cannonball through your ribs, a cutlass across your throat, a slip on a blood-slick plank. The captain's voice is low but clear. "Remember, if you're first over the rail, you get first pick." That promise makes the men grin like wolves. Even you feel it, a raw, irrational hunger. When the signal flare streaks upward, time unspools. Cannons belch flame and smoke. The deck jerks beneath you as your ship shudders forward. The first volley smashes across the Spanish vessel's stern, sending splinters high as shrieks echo over the water. Before the smoke clears, you're running. You vault the rail with the others, rope clenched in one hand, cutlass in the other. For a heartbeat, you're weightless over the gap. Then your boots slam down on enemy planks and everything becomes a blur. You parry a blade without thinking. Someone barrels into you and you stagger sideways, nearly over the rail again. A shot cracks past your ear, close enough to make it ring. This is no choreographed duel. It's chaos. Cannons still roaring, men cursing and screaming, smoke billowing so thick you could vanish inside it forever. But you don't. You fight, because if you stop, you'll die. A few feet away, a shipmate you know only as Long Tom grapples a Spanish officer to the deck, shouting in English and Spanish alike. Another pirate with a red scarf vaults past you, swinging a boarding axe. It's the kind of scene history books reduce to footnotes. The pirates carried the deck, as if it were simple, as if it were clean. It isn't. At some point the defenders break. You see it in their eyes, hope draining away as the black flag rises overhead. Some drop their weapons, hands up. Others flee below decks, hoping for a barricade. You find yourself standing in the middle of it all, chest heaving, blade dripping, and you realise, with a clarity that nearly buckles your knees, that you survived. A sailor surrenders to you personally, eyes wide, mouth trembling as he stammers in Spanish. You nod, gesturing for him to kneel. You don't hate him. He's just on the wrong side of this moment. The next hours are a flurry of shouted orders, inventoried cargo, prisoners secured. Your hands shake as you count bolts of cloth and casks of sugar, the scent of blood and salt blurring into one. Later, back aboard your own ship, the captain gathers you all around the mainmast. The crew listens in silence as he tallies the prize. Silver coins, barrels of cacao, crates of indigo. Enough to make the risks seem almost reasonable. Almost. When the shares are read out, you notice something. The men who boarded first get their promised bonuses. No arguments, no quibbling. The code is honoured, even in the aftermath. That evening, as the sea quiets and the wounded moan below, you sit with Long Tom and the gunner with the serpent tattoo. Someone passes around a bottle of rum. You take a long swig, then ask the question that's been coiled in your chest since the fight. Why do we do this? Long Tom raises a brow. Because life ashore is worse. He leans back, staring into the stars. Because no king ever offered us an equal share of anything. The gunner adds, because here, if you've got the guts, you can take what you want. They both look at you then, testing whether you understand. And you do. You understand that freedom isn't a tidy concept. It's a bloody, roaring thing that sometimes wears a skull on its flag. You drain the last of the rum, feeling the burn all the way down. Tomorrow, you know, there will be more cannon smoke, more questions you can't fully answer. But tonight, you sleep with salt crusting your hair, silver coins in your pocket, and the knowledge that you faced the worst the sea could throw at you. The ship smells of old blood and fresh ambition. You rise from your hammock to find the crew bustling like ants around a barrel of pitch, patching holes and checking the rigging. This is the price of victory. Repairs, reorganising, and the constant vigilance that no one in your own ranks tries to pocket more than their due. The captain stands aft, chart in hand, his thumb pressed to a tiny crescent-shaped bay etched into the coastline. We'll lay up here for a spell, he says. Fresh water, repairs, and a bit of liberty. He means a pirate haven, one of the hidden coves or ramshackle towns that thrive in the margins of empire. Too small to bother conquering, too wild to ever really be tamed. By mid-afternoon, the ship eases into a lagoon so clear you can see silver fish flickering below the keel. As the anchor drops, a quiet thrill ripples through the crew. Shore leave. The small harbour is a patchwork of makeshift docks, half-finished buildings, and scavenged sails strung as awnings. Chickens scratch in the sand beside barrels of rum. Someone has painted a crooked sign over a tavern door. No credit, no questions, no regrets. A perfect motto for a place like this. You step onto the creaking pier, boots sinking into warm sand. The air smells of smoke, salt, and roasted pork. It's almost festive, as if the settlement itself is glad to see you. Inside the tavern, it's chaos in miniature. A violin screeches over the babble of voices. A woman in a patched red skirt serves tankards so full they slosh over your knuckles. Long Tom materialises beside you, clapping you on the back. "Welcome to the only real kingdom in the Caribbean," he shouts over the din. "Nobody here gives a damn who your father was." He's right. This is a republic of the unwanted. Sailors gone rogue, escaped slaves, outcasts of every flavour. A place where you can reinvent yourself by sunrise, if you're quick with a lie and quicker with a blade. After a few drinks, you wander back outside, blinking in the sudden brightness. A pair of children dash past with stolen oranges. A toothless old man dozes under a palm, a pistol balanced on his belly. Everywhere you look, you see evidence of the uneasy truce that holds this place together. Merchants trading goods no port inspector would ever approve. Captains shaking hands over promises that might not last the night. Tired men drinking to forget what they did to earn their freedom. You slip down an alley of canvas tents, where a wiry merchant offers you a compass he swears once belonged to Henry Morgan himself. You don't believe him, but you buy it anyway, because out here, the story is worth as much as the object. As dusk falls, the tavern spills laughter and shadows across the sand. You sit on a crate, listening to the gunner with the serpent tattoo tell a story about a pirate who buried a fortune so well no man has ever found it. "And you believe that?" you ask, grinning. He shrugs. "Don't have to. All that matters is the idea that there's always more treasure out there, if you're mad enough to look." A passing breeze flutters the canvas awnings. You think about that. The lure of something hidden, something no king can claim. The longer you stay, the more you see the haven for what it is. A fragile experiment in freedom. No governor, no garrison. Just an unspoken agreement that everyone gets to be what they choose. Of course it can't last. Even the best hidden coves eventually draw the eye of some empire. But for tonight, the illusion holds. Someone starts a song in a language you don't recognize. Someone else picks up the harmony. For a moment, it doesn't matter where you came from or what you've done. You close your eyes, listening to the music drift across the sand. In the dark, a voice beside you says softly, "If there's any place in the world where a man can be truly free, it's here." To the sound of gulls, and you think screaming overhead, right, and the reek of last night's spilled rum baking in the sand. For a moment, you lie there under the canvas awning, watching the breeze stir the edge of the sailcloth, and you wonder if this place is real at all. A haven of outcasts bound by nothing but necessity and a shared desire to live beyond the reach of kings. As you sit up, rubbing grit from your eyes, you hear someone nearby arguing in a mix of Spanish and English. Two women stand at the corner of a trader's stall, voices rising over a crate of stolen silks. The shorter one jabs a finger at her companion. "Tell them," she snaps. "Tell them it wasn't all men." Her friend throws up her hands. "I already did." They're fighting about the same question that haunts every pirate story. Who counts as a buccaneer, who gets remembered, and who disappears between the lines. And here, at last, you meet the women who refuse to vanish. By mid-morning, the captain calls the crew together to introduce two new recruits. They stand barefoot in the sand, faces sunburned, hair tied back under scarves. One is lean and sharp-eyed, the other broader in the shoulders than half the men on the deck. Someone near you mutters that women aboard ship are bad luck. Another shrugs and says, "They can swing a cutlass same as any of us." You remember stories you'd heard on shore, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, women who dressed as men and carved their names into legend. But here's what the tavern tales don't always mention. Most didn't bother to hide. Many crews welcomed them, if only because they were as desperate and daring as the men. One of the new arrivals catches you staring. She raises her chin, a glint in her eyes that dares you to doubt her. You look away first. Later, as the ship prepares to depart, you help load casks while the captain reads the articles aloud. Each person, no matter their sex or past, is bound to the same code. Shares of plunder, rights to a vote, punishments for betrayal. And though historians still argue about how many women truly sailed under the black flag, here and now, you see the truth in flesh and bone. They're not here because they were forced. They're here because no other life offered them this taste of freedom. As the sun climbs higher, you catch snippets of gossip. Some say one of the women once slit a governor's throat. Another swears she escaped a convent in Havana with a stolen pistol. You don't know which stories are true. You suspect that doesn't matter. Out here, reputation is currency, and every tale, real or embellished, buys you another measure of respect. When the anchor comes up and the ship slides from the cove, you stand at the rail, watching the haven recede behind you. Long Tom comes to stand beside you, shading his eyes with one calloused hand. "There goes the last place where no one cares who you are," he says. You think about that as the breeze stiffens and the sails fill, about the women now rolling powder kegs and coiling ropes alongside the men, about how the histories you read in school never mentioned them. You think, maybe that's the point. Maybe the real Buccaneers were the ones who refused to stay invisible. That night, you gather with the others by the mainmast as the cook ladles out thin stew. The women take their places in line, same as any man, and no one complains. Later, as the stars wheel overhead, you hear a laugh you can't place. Sharp, defiant, a sound that cuts through the hush like a blade. You smile into the dark. Whatever the historians decide to argue about later, you are here to see it. And you know one thing for certain. This ship, this life, has always belonged to the quarterdeck where the captain studies the horizon through his battered spyglass. His coat flaps around his boots as he lowers the glass and rubs a hand across his jaw. "See that?" he says, tilting his head toward a smudge of sails on the pale blue edge of the world. You squint. "Convoy?" He nods. "Portuguese. Rich enough to make them worth the powder." He doesn't have to say more. The crew feels the same low thrum of hunger you do, the same ache to seize what no king has any right to claim. But as the ship glides forward, sails straining, your mind wanders back to the stories you heard last night. Tales of black flags and black legends, some so soaked in horror you can hardly believe them. Below deck, Long Tom and the serpent-tattooed gunner are deep in a debate. "I'm telling you," Tom insists, "most of what they say about us is nonsense. Half those pamphlets were written by clerks who never set foot aboard a ship." The gunner snorts. "Nonsense," he says. "You ever see what happens when a captain refuses to heave to?" They fall quiet when they see you. But you already know. This life breeds stories that grow like weeds. Some of it's true. You've seen men thrown overboard with cannonballs chained to their ankles. You've watched prisoners barter everything they owned for a promise of mercy. But just as often, you've seen pirate captains take cargo without a drop of blood spilled, more interested in a clean profit than in slaughter. Historians still argue about whether pirates were monsters or something more complicated. You suspect the truth sits somewhere in that uneasy middle. As the Portuguese ships loom larger, the captain orders the colours raised, but today he chooses a plain black flag, not the red one which would promise no quarter. Even terror, you realise, comes in shades. When the convoy sees your approach, they don't fight. They heave to, sails slackening, crews standing white-faced along the rails. A tense hour follows. Your boarding party clambers across, weapons sheathed but ready. Below decks, the cargo manifests are read aloud. Tobacco, hides, and a hold half full of silver bars. You help record the lists, trying not to look at the Portuguese sailors. They stare past you, eyes fixed on some far-off place where this isn't happening. By dusk, the goods are transferred, the ships cut loose to limp home lighter and poorer but alive. You watch them go, wondering what stories they'll tell. "Demons," Long Tom says at your elbow, reading your thoughts. "They'll call us demons, same as always." "Are we?" you ask before you can stop yourself. His face softens. "Sometimes." That night, the captain orders a double ration of rum in honour of the clean take. A ragged cheer goes up as mugs are passed along the deck. Someone starts to sing, an old ballad about a sailor who swore he'd never bow to any crown again. You hum along, feeling the melody seep into your bones. You think about the stories that will be told 100 years from now, about how they'll likely be written by men who never heard this song, never smelled this salt air, never felt the quiver of the planks beneath their feet. You wonder if those future historians will ever understand that pirates were many things. Brutal, yes, but also bound together by a creed that no admiral could stamp out. As the song fades and the sea hushes, you lean back against a coil of rope. Maybe you are a demon in some ledger, maybe a freedom fighter in someone else's. But in this moment, under this sky, you're simply alive in a way you never were ashore. And for tonight, midnight, rolling across the deck like an omen you can taste. You wake to the lookout's shout, a word that slices through sleep and rum alike. "Sails to windward!" You scramble up the ladder, heart hammering. All around you, men are shrugging into coats, lacing up boots, checking pistols. Even the captain looks a shade more solemn as he lifts his spyglass. You follow his gaze. Against the bruised dawn sky, the silhouette is unmistakable. 3 ships, high-sided, moving fast. "They've found us," the captain says softly. It doesn't take long for the rumours to crackle through the crew, Spanish or English Navy. Nobody's sure yet. But either way, it's the hammer that always follows the anvil of piracy. For weeks you've been plundering convoys, growing bolder with each success. Sooner or later the empires would send their hounds, Sooner is now. As the sun creeps higher, the enemy ships creep closer. Their sails are clean, their hulls unscarred by desperation. You know they are well provisioned, disciplined, commanded by men with titles and pensions. You also know they're hunting you like a rabid dog. All morning you labour with the others to ready the ship. Powder kegs rolled into place, pistols charged and laid in neat rows, buckets filled to quench flames before they spread. The quartermaster calls out assignments in a voice so calm it almost makes you believe this is routine. Maybe for him, it is. By midday, there's no doubt. It's a Spanish squadron. 3 frigates, their guns yawning open, hulls trimmed in the arrogant gold of empire. You look around and see the quiet resolve in every face. No panic, no prayers, just a kind of fatal acceptance. The captain steps up onto a coil of rope so everyone can see him. His voice cuts through the salt wind. "No man will be forced to stay," he says. "Anyone who wants to try for shore can take the launch." Nobody moves. You stand rooted to the deck, feeling something close to pride. You think of all the names these men are called: pirates, thieves, monsters, and know that, whatever else, they are not cowards. The hours stretch taut as rigging. While you wait, you polish your cutlass to a dull gleam, trying not to think about what comes next. You wonder if, in some Spanish admiral's logbook, this day is already written in neat ink. Objective: eliminate vermin. A thought strikes you then. To them, you are not a person at all, just a problem to be solved, an infestation to be eradicated. You glance over and see Long Tom cleaning his pistols with the same deliberate care he uses to eat or spit or tie a knot. "Ever think you'd see this day?" you ask, more to fill the silence than for any answer. He doesn't look up. "We all see it eventually." He snaps the pistol closed with a click that sounds final in the quiet. By afternoon, the Spanish ships fan out into a half moon, pressing closer. The captain orders the black flag raised. No red this time, no bluff about surrender or mercy. Just the skull and bones, stark as the truth. A hush falls. Even the sea seems to hold its breath. Someone behind you starts to laugh, too high and too loud, until it chokes off into a cough. You don't turn to look. Then the first cannonball screams past, splintering the rail with a sound you feel in your teeth. Chaos erupts. You've been in fights before, boarding actions, quick raids, but nothing like this. This is an extermination. You haul on a rope with 3 others as the sails shift, trying to swing your broadside to bear. Another ball punches through the deck behind you, flinging shards of timber in a deadly spray. A man you shared stew with last night crumples without a sound. There's no time to grieve. You reload pistols, pass powder, brace the masts. Your hands are black with soot, your ears ringing so badly you can't hear the captain's shouts. Smoke swallows the ship. You glimpse faces lit by cannon flashes. Grim, resolute, as if everyone has agreed that if this is the end, it will be worthy of song. When your broadside fires, the recoil nearly throws you off your feet. The Spanish flagship staggers, her own deck suddenly crawling with confusion. A cheer goes up, raw, defiant and ragged as a torn sail. You want to believe you can escape, but even as you fight, you know the noose is tightening. An hour later, the mizzen-mast shudders and falls away with a roar that drowns every other sound. The deck lists under your boots. The rigging becomes a spiderweb of fire. The captain strides past you, his coat in tatters. He meets your gaze with an expression that is almost serene. "Take what you can and go below," he tells you. "If they board us, it won't be clean." You hesitate, then obey. Below deck, the wounded groan in the half-dark, the air thick with powder smoke. Someone hands you a bucket. You have no idea what you're supposed to do with it, but you take it anyway just to have something to hold. Time loses meaning. You measure it by the rise and fall of cannon fire. When the noise finally eases, you creep back topside. The Spanish ships loom close enough to see the soldiers lining their rails, muskets bristling. The boarding planks are coming, and in that moment something curious happens. Every man still standing, pirate, carpenter, cook or powder monkey, moves to the rail. No order given, no speech required, just a shared decision. If this is to end, it will end together. The captain lifts his sword, not to charge, not to surrender, just to salute the enemy. It is the strangest thing you will ever witness, this final gesture of defiance from men history calls criminals, and you understand in a way you never did before that freedom is not always about winning. Sometimes it is only about choosing the terms of your defeat. The Spanish officers shout something you can't hear. A voice beside you murmurs, "Raise the articles." Someone, no one you'll ever be able to name, ties the parchment to the stub of the fallen mast. The ink is smeared, the edges burned. But it's still legible. The code you all agreed to, the law you chose for yourselves. For a heartbeat, the whole world seems to pause. Then the first grappling hook lands on the rail, and you draw your cutlass. Because if you must fall, you'll fall as you live. The rails, there's no time to think. You heave at the nearest line, trying to wrench it free, but it's already too late. Spanish Marines pour over the side, muskets braced against their shoulders, bayonets gleaming. A ragged cheer erupts from your crew, half bravado, half desperation. The captain steps forward, blade raised in a calm, almost ceremonial salute. "Hold the line," he calls, voice carrying above the din. No quarter given, no quarter asked. And in that moment, you feel it. The strange, undeniable pride of belonging to something so absolute it terrifies even you. The first volley cracks out, smoke blooming white across the deck. Men fall. Others surge forward, cutlasses slashing, pistols booming in the crush. It isn't a battle so much as an ending. You drive your blade into the melee without knowing exactly whom you strike. A man in a blue coat staggers back, screaming. Another lunges at you with a pike, and you duck under it by pure instinct, ramming the pommel of your cutlass into his ribs. To your left, the serpent-tattooed gunner has somehow clambered onto a barrel and is firing both pistols down into the press. His face is streaked black, teeth bared in a grin so feral it looks like something out of a nightmare. And all around you, the articles flutter from the shattered mast, ink bleeding across the parchment in the gusting smoke. This is your democracy now, you think. Not a parliament or a governor's court, but this, men who refuse to bow. The Spanish advance in disciplined lines, their boots thumping in eerie unison across your broken deck. You can almost admire the symmetry of it, the way Empire has trained them to march without question. A musket ball tears past your cheek, hot and fast, so close it feels like the world itself is trying to erase you. You slam your shoulder against the nearest spar, panting. Nearby, Long Tom is wrestling a Marine half again his size, both of them cursing in languages you don't recognize. Someone screams for powder, someone else bellows your name. It's all happening too fast and too slow at once. And then, inevitably, the last defense buckles. The Spanish captain strides across the deck, sword held high, shouting orders you don't understand. One by one, your shipmates drop their blades, driven back by sheer numbers. A hush falls, heavy as wet canvas. The captain of your ship, your captain, stands at the rail, chest heaving, eyes bright. For a moment you think he'll spit defiance to the very last. Instead, he lowers his blade. A ripple goes through the pirates, like a muscle unclenching after a cramp. Some sink to their knees, others just stare at the splintered planks beneath their boots, too stunned for any protest. You're still clutching your cutlass when a Spanish soldier levels a musket at your heart. "Armour!" he barks. Slowly you let the blade drop. It lands with a dull clatter that sounds like a door slamming shut. They bind your wrists in coarse rope. The man behind you shoves you forward. Around you, the Spanish are shouting to secure prisoners, to douse the smouldering fires, to tally the dead. The serpent-tattooed gunner is hauled past you, bleeding from a gash in his scalp. When he meets your gaze, he manages a crooked smile. "Told you," he rasps, "we'd see this day." The next hours are a blur. You're herded into the waist of the ship, forced to kneel with the others while officers confer in urgent voices. The deck reeks of blood and black powder. Overhead, the Spanish flag rises where the black skull once flew. You watch it snap in the wind, feeling something inside you finally go still. When sunset falls, the prisoners are counted. Those too badly wounded to stand are laid out under makeshift awnings. A priest circulates among them, murmuring last rites. You hear the Spanish captain issuing orders to prepare the ship for sea. He wants to sail by dawn, you realise, to drag this battered prize back to some colonial port where a court and a rope are waiting. Someone beside you starts to sob quietly into his bound hands. You turn your head away, because you know what comes next. Late that night, under a lantern sway, an officer reads the charges in a flat, disinterested tone. Piracy, theft, murder upon the high seas. The list is long. When your name is called, you lift your chin, refusing to flinch. It's strange how calm you feel. After all the cannon roars and boarding cries, this moment, the quiet condemnation, seems almost gentle by comparison. You're marched below decks with the others, crammed into the darkness of the hold. The air is rank and hot, thick with the breath of men who know their story is almost done. Someone hums a scrap of a sea shanty, voice wavering. You close your eyes and let the melody sink into your bones. When sleep comes, it is mercifully deep. At sunrise, you're woken by boots on the planks overhead. The hatch creaks open, and blinding light spills down. One by one, you're brought up to the quarterdeck. A magistrate waits there, a portly man in a powdered wig that looks absurd against the backdrop of your battered ship. He reads a proclamation you barely hear, something about the authority of the crown and the sanctity of commerce. And then comes the part you knew was coming. You and your shipmates are to stand trial in Port Royal. The magistrate looks almost apologetic as he finishes, as if he'd rather be anywhere but here, passing sentence on men who chose another kind of life. They march you below again, trussed in pairs. You sit on the cold planks, your shoulder pressed to Long Tom's. He turns to you, his voice hoarse. You regret it. You think about it, about every dawn on the open sea, every stolen coin, every moment you felt more alive than you ever did ashore, and you shake your head. He grins, and for a heartbeat you're both just sailors again. Outside, the Spanish squadron manoeuvres into formation. Sails bloom white against the dawn. The deck shudders as the helm comes about. You know that soon you'll be in a courtroom, and after that, well, you don't need a magistrate to tell you what happens to pirates. But as the ship cuts east, you feel no shame, because for a time you were free, and though the world will call you criminal, you will always remember this. You chose this life, so it feels longer. You spend the voyage in the dark belly of the captured ship, your hands bound in front of you, ankles chained to an iron ring set into the planks. You count every groan of the timbers, every hour by the creak of the watch bell overhead. Food comes twice a day, hardtack so stale you have to soak it in brine to swallow. A bucket of water lowered on a rope. No one says much. You're all conserving what little strength remains. When you sleep, you dream in snatches, rigging humming in the wind, the captain's voice calling orders, the fluttering parchment of the articles nailed to the mast. Sometimes you wake gasping, half believing you can still hear cannon fire. On the fifth night, Long Tom stirs beside you. In the dim glow of the lantern, you see how hollow his cheeks have become. You ever wonder, he murmurs, what happens to the ones who vanish? You blink, not following. The men who jump ship, he says, slip away in some cove, take a new name. You picture it. A pirate stepping ashore with pockets full of silver, reinventing himself as a trader or farmer, no one the wiser. They get to be someone else, you say softly. Tom nods, eyelids fluttering. Maybe that's the best ending any of us can hope for. His voice is already trailing off, lost to exhaustion. But you can't shake the thought, because as your chains bite into your wrists, you realise you never even considered disappearing. You chose this life all the way through to the end. At dawn on the seventh day, the hatch opens. Sunlight blazes down so bright you have to turn your face away. Up, the guard barks in Spanish accented English. You clamber to your feet, joints stiff, muscles cramping. One by one, you're hauled onto the deck, blinking into the sudden blaze. Port Royal rises ahead, whitewashed warehouses and crooked alleys, ships crowding the harbour, gulls swirling over fish guts dumped from the wharves. You've heard it called the wickedest city on earth. Now you know why. At the harbour mouth, a Royal Navy frigate waits with its guns run out, as if even now they expect your ship to sprout black flags and try for an impossible escape. Long Tom shuffles up beside you, his face ghostly in the glare. He grins, showing a mouthful of gaps. "Cheer up," he rasps. "We finally made it to the big city." You try to smile, but it feels thin, because even from here you can see the scaffold rising over the harbour, stout beams, thick ropes swaying in the breeze. And you know some of you won't leave this port alive. They march you ashore in pairs. Onlookers spill from taverns and shops to watch you pass. Merchants, sailors, washerwomen, a few children perched on barrels. Their faces are a gallery of expressions: fear, fascination, disgust. You keep your gaze ahead. The courthouse looms over the square, white plaster already blistering in the heat. Inside, it's cool and dim. A long bench waits behind the magistrate's desk, already occupied by men in wigs that look as if they were dipped in flour. You're lined up in front of them, wrists still bound. The magistrate glances down at the papers in his hand, then back at you. He begins in a voice as dry as old parchment. "Prisoners," he intones. "You stand accused of piracy, the theft of His Majesty's goods, and murder upon the high seas." He reads each name aloud. Yours comes last. When he lifts his gaze again, you meet it square on. The trial is not what you expected. There are no witnesses you recognize, only captains of plundered ships, their voices quavering as they describe your flag, your guns, your faces glimpsed through the smoke. Some of their accounts blur fact and rumour. Others are so precise you feel the prickle of memory, as if you're back on the deck again. One after another, your crewmates are called to speak in their own defence. A few try to plead mercy, claiming they were pressed into service. Others remain silent. When your turn comes, you clear your throat, voice hoarse from days of salt air and stale bread. "We signed the articles," you say simply. "We knew what we were." A murmur ripples through the courtroom. The magistrate taps his quill against the desk. "Do you repent?" You take a slow breath, feeling every eye in the chamber on you. "I regret nothing," you say, your words steady as the tide. "I chose this life." A hush falls that feels longer than the voyage itself. Then the clerk begins reading the sentence. 2 days later, you wake to the clatter of keys and the scrape of the cell door. "On your feet," a guard snaps. The chain is removed from your ankle. They bind your wrists again, though at this point you hardly notice. You're led through corridors that smell of mildew and old fear, out into the courtyard where the scaffold waits. Sunlight spills over the wooden platform. Ropes dangle like question marks over the future you won't see. A priest steps forward, his face pale under his hood. He murmurs words of absolution you barely hear. And then you're climbing the steps, boots thudding on rough boards. From this height you can see the harbour spread like a map, ships nosing at their moorings, gulls wheeling, the sea glittering to the horizon. Long Tom stands beside you, lips moving in a silent prayer. You wish you believed in something, but the only faith you ever found was the code you signed your name to, the brotherhood you built plank by plank. The hangman adjusts the noose. The magistrate clears his throat, reading the final condemnation in a voice that sounds bored, as though you're nothing more than paperwork. And maybe you are. When he finishes, there's a hush. The captain of your ship lifts his chin. His voice carries across the square. "We were free men," he says. It is not a plea. It is not a boast. It is simply the last truth he has to give. In that instant, you feel a strange, fierce peace. Because whatever happens next, no king will ever own you again. The hangman steps back. You close your eyes, and in the darkness behind your lids you see it all. The salt spray, the black flag snapping overhead, the articles nailed to the mast. You remember the first time you set foot on that creaking deck and thought, "Here, at last, I belong." No matter how history writes your story, you know this is the only ending that ever made sense. Because even in chains, you're still what you chose to be, unbowed. And that is all the freedom ever, but it doesn't. Instead, it fades into morning. You blink awake, not in the afterlife, if there is one, but in a holding cell below the courthouse. You're alive, though the ropes have left bruises around your neck, the skin raw and tender. The magistrate, it turns out, had other plans. Your execution was postponed. Officially, the reason is that they're waiting for instructions from London. Unofficially, you hear whispers that the governor wants to make an example of you in a more public spectacle. Something about sending a message. You spend the next week in a limbo so strange it feels like a fever dream. Each dawn you half expect to be hauled up the scaffold. Each dusk you discover you've been granted one more day. It's in those quiet hours that the reality of what you've been becomes sharp as a blade. One morning, the guards bring you out to the yard for exercise. They stand in a loose semicircle, muskets resting in their crooks of their arms. You shuffle across the packed dirt, feeling your legs remember how to move freely, even for a few paces. It's here you first see the boards nailed to the courthouse wall. Proclamations, wanted posters, some yellowed with age, others fresh ink still curling. Your eyes catch on a familiar shape, a crude woodcut of a black flag. Below it, the notice reads, Notice of outlawry. Persons known to sail under no national ensign and to conduct piracy upon the high seas. Said persons to be taken dead or alive, with bounty to be claimed upon delivery. There, in a list of names rendered in stiff legal script, is your own. You almost laugh. A week ago you were a man with a vote, a share, a measure of honour among thieves. Now you are a line on a government notice, no different than a rabid dog to be hunted down. Long Tom shuffles over, his chains scraping the ground. His eyes follow your gaze to the board. Means we mattered, he says softly. Or that we were fools, you reply. He grins, a flash of his ruined teeth. Both, he's right. On the fourth evening, you're woken by the scrape of a key. A jailer you've never seen before steps in, holding a lantern that bleeds light across the straw-strewn floor. You? He says, jerking his chin. Your heart stutters, thinking this is finally it, the last walk. But instead of the yard, they lead you through a side corridor you've never noticed, the walls damp and streaked with mould. The passage opens into a low vaulted chamber. At a table sits a man in a fine coat, powdered wig slightly askew. His skin is waxy pale, like he's spent too long behind walls. He doesn't look up as you're chained to a chair across from him. State your name, he murmurs, quill already scratching. You do. And you did willingly sign articles of piracy? Yes. Did you serve aboard the brig known as Mercy's Wain? I did. Did you commit acts of violence and theft upon the high seas? You pause, because here, in this cellar, the truth feels different, but you answer anyway. I did. His quill moves, never pausing. After a moment he sets it aside and steeples his hands. His eyes are the colour of ash. You understand, of course, he says, that if you offer information useful to the Crown, there may be leniency. And there it is. The choice you always suspected would come. Name your shipmates. Reveal where treasure was hidden. Trade your honour for your life. Your throat feels dry as driftwood. You think of the articles, the vote you cast the day you boarded, the quiet pact that whatever else you were, you'd stand together. No, you say finally, I have nothing to give you. The scribe studies you for a long time, as if trying to find the weak place in your resolve, but there isn't one, not anymore. He gestures to the guards. Return him to the cells. And that is the sum total of your confession. 2 more weeks pass. By now, the entire port knows your story. Children dare each other to sneak to the courthouse steps to peer through the bars. Merchants shake their heads when your name comes up, clucking tongues over the waste of it all. But not everyone despises you. Sometimes, when the guards aren't watching, a sailor will pass by and toss a crust of bread through the grate. Once, you hear a woman's voice, rough with salt air, whisper, They never caught my brother either. The compassion cuts deeper than the hatred. On the 17th dawn, they march you to the dockside prison where the final sentences are posted. You stand in line as the magistrate reads out names, each one followed by a verdict: execution, transportation, imprisonment. When he comes to yours, there's a hush. Sentence of death by hanging, he intones, to be carried out 1 week hence. A guard jabs you forward before the words can even settle. 1 week, 7 days. Not long, but longer than you expected. Long enough to think about every choice that brought you here. That night, you press your forehead to the cold bars, watching the tide creep in under the pilings. You picture the Spanish Main, the emerald shallows, the glittering convoys, the black flags snapping in the wind, and you realize with a kind of wonder that you wouldn't trade a single heartbeat of it. Because for all its brutality, all its ruin, that life was yours. Yours to shape, yours to squander, yours to stand or fall by. When the guards douse the lanterns, darkness wraps you like an old blanket, and for the first time in weeks you sleep without dreams. In the morning, the chaplain comes. He carries a little book bound in cracked leather, the corners worn by countless condemned hands. He asks if you'd like him to read to you. You shake your head. "Will you pray with me?" "I'm past praying," you murmur. He nods, as if he's heard this before. "You regret nothing?" "No," you say. "And if I did, it wouldn't matter." He studies you for a long time, then closes the book. "Then may God judge you kindly," he says. You watch him go, his footfalls echoing in the stone passage. The days blur together. Each dawn feels thinner, as if the world itself is drawing away from you. And in that thinning space, you discover something unexpected. Peace. Because no matter what they call you, a pirate, a villain, a murderer, you know the truth of what you were. A man who chose, a man who would not kneel. On your final morning, that, you wake before dawn, your body attuned to the slightest creak of footsteps, the quiet jangle of keys. The guards arrive precisely when you expect them. "On your feet," one says, his voice bored and detached, as though this is merely routine, as though your life is simply one more entry in a ledger that needs closing. You rise slowly, savouring each movement of muscle and bone. Your boots scrape against the stone floor and you feel strangely grateful for these last moments of sensation. The guard binds your wrists again. The rope feels rough and familiar, like an old, bitter friend. "You ready?" he asks, not unkindly. "As ready as I'll be." They walk you from the cell along a corridor damp with morning dew and out into the yard. Dawn breaks gently, spreading like spilled honey across the rooftops of Port Royal. You breathe deeply, savouring salt air that tastes cleaner, somehow sweeter today. In the courtyard you see your shipmates assembled, a small defiant cluster. Their eyes meet yours in quiet greeting. Long Tom stands at the front, straightening as you join them. "Morning," he murmurs. "Morning. It's absurdly casual. Two men greeting each other on their final day. But it steadies you, fills you with something solid. Together you walk toward the waiting wagon that will carry you through the streets to the scaffold. Chains jangle softly in rhythm, a low harmony to your own steady breathing. As the horses jerk forward, the streets become crowded. People push and elbow for a glimpse of the condemned pirates. Merchants pause their haggling, shopkeepers crane their necks, and children dart between legs, eyes wide and curious. You wonder briefly what stories they'll tell of this day, whether your legend will fade or grow larger with every retelling. At the scaffold, a crowd has already gathered, their faces blank with morbid fascination. The structure looms over the harbour, stark and grim, ropes swaying lazily in the breeze. As you climb the steps, you notice small details, the way the wood creaks beneath your weight, the faint tang of fresh pitch, the squawk of gulls wheeling above. The magistrate waits, his wig powdered and new, his expression grave yet oddly satisfied. When he begins to speak, it's clear he's practiced every word carefully. "You stand condemned," he intones, for crimes against crown, commerce and common decency, piracy, murder, robbery upon the high seas. His voice drones on, listing each of your crimes with meticulous detachment. It might as well be someone else he's speaking about, some stranger who lived a life entirely separate from your own. When he finishes, there is silence, broken only by the shuffle of the hangman preparing his ropes. The magistrate looks down at you, as though expecting you to plead, to beg for mercy at the last. But you simply stare back, calm as the ocean after a storm. At last he sighs softly and nods to the hangman. One by one your crewmates step forward. Some mutter quiet prayers, some remain silent, eyes fixed on a distant horizon only they can see. Long Tom moves to your side, his voice is rough but clear. "You think it hurts?" he asks, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Not for long," you say, returning his smile. "Then let's be done with it," he says. "See you on the other side." He climbs the steps without hesitation. The rope is looped swiftly around his neck, but his gaze never falters. The hangman adjusts the noose carefully, checking its position as though the comfort of the condemned matters. The platform opens beneath him with a sharp crack. He drops, and for a terrible instant you cannot breathe. But then it's over, quick and mercifully swift. The silence afterward feels heavier, pressing against your chest like a lead weight. It's your turn now. You move forward without prompting, placing your boots firmly upon the platform. From here, you see the harbour clearly, ships drifting lazily, sails unfurling to catch the morning breeze. The hangman fits the rope around your neck, tightening the knot carefully. It feels oddly comforting, a final anchor holding you steady. "Any last words?" the magistrate asks almost gently. You look at the crowd. They stare back, fascinated and fearful, waiting for something memorable, something to tell their children. You take a breath, tasting the salt air one last time. "I lived a free man," you say, voice steady, clear enough for all to hear. "And I'll die one." For a moment the magistrate hesitates, as though your words have thrown him. Then he nods slowly. The hangman steps back, hand poised upon the lever. In this final instant your mind is clear, filled with memories of every choice you made. The creaking deck beneath your feet, the rush of battle, the fierce democracy of your crew, bound by nothing but shared freedom and shared fate. Then the trapdoor swings open beneath your boots. You drop, air whistling past your ears, rope tightening swiftly. A burst of brilliant white fills your vision, and suddenly you feel nothing. No pain, no fear, only an immense and overwhelming peace. Your last conscious thought is gratitude, that you lived fully, fiercely, and on your own terms, even at the end. But the story doesn't end with your death. Not really. Because the crowd gathered that morning saw something they never expected. Men and women who faced their end without flinching, who went to the scaffold as if it were simply another voyage, another daring chase across open seas. Stories quickly spread. Some called you devils, others heroes, but none who witnessed your end could deny the quiet courage that marked your final moments. In taverns across Port Royal, your name becomes a whispered toast. Your deeds grow more daring with every retelling. Songs begin to circulate, ballads of rebellion and defiance that ring from port to port, carried by sailors who dream of freedom as raw and uncompromising as yours. Decades later, historians will still argue about you, debating fiercely in quiet libraries and dusty lecture halls. Some will condemn you outright as pirates, criminals deserving no pity or admiration. Others, however, will wonder quietly if you were something else entirely. Freedom fighters, rebels who chose the sea rather than a life under the boot of empire. They'll sift through trial records, captains' logs, faded newspapers, seeking proof to settle their arguments. Yet they'll never quite agree. And perhaps that's fitting, because the truth of who you were cannot be neatly written into history's tidy narratives. You were neither heroes nor villains, neither wholly good nor purely evil. Instead, you existed in that uncertain space between freedom and chaos, driven by your refusal to live under anyone's thumb. Those who stood beneath the gallows that morning carried away more than they expected. They carried a quiet rebellion of their own, an uneasy question they could not shake. Now, what would it feel like to choose your fate as completely as you did? Long after your bones have turned to dust, people will still stare at the ocean and wonder, just for a moment, how it would feel to sail beyond the horizon, under no flag but their own. Your legacy, then, is not the violence or the treasure you took. It's something subtler and far more dangerous, the idea that there's another way to live, a life chosen freely, fiercely, without apology. And that perhaps is from the gallows, but the world moves on. Port Royal's streets fill with gossip, business, and the cries of dock workers. But for a time, maybe only a week, maybe longer, your name lingers, passed from mouth to mouth like a secret coin. A few days after your execution, the city returns to its rhythms. Sailors carouse, magistrates scold, and governors draft the next round of proclamations against piracy. The gallows are cleaned, the ropes coiled, and soon another set of condemned souls take your place. But something's changed. There's an edge to the songs sung in taverns now, a bitterness that wasn't there before, a kind of longing woven through each chorus. The memory of those who chose the gallows over a master's leash sits quietly in the air. Your story, like so many before, refuses to die. Young men and women gather in the tavern corners, daring each other to say your name, to repeat the last words you spoke with their own heads held high. Children weave tales of you into their games. Sometimes you're a hero, other times a monster, but always a figure whose life ended by choice, not by surrender. The merchants and officials do what they can to scrub away your legend, posting new rewards for pirates and sending more ships out to patrol the Spanish Main. Yet for every pirate they hang, another seems to appear, sometimes bolder, sometimes more careful, but never quite gone. Meanwhile, the world changes. The Caribbean's golden age of piracy begins to wane. Governors grow ruthless, offering pardons with one hand and tightening nooses with the other. Navies multiply, warships bristling along the trade routes, hunting the last Buccaneers like wolves chasing stray sheep. Pirate havens crumble under cannon fire, their makeshift markets and hidden coves claimed at last by empire. Still, old habits die hard. Along the coast, in the shadowed corners of Jamaica, Nassau and Tortuga, pirate crews still gather at low tide to remember the code. They tell stories of a ship called Mercy's Wain, her black flag snapping in the wind, her articles read aloud by lantern light. They toast to the men and women who chose a different kind of life, a life as uncertain as the sea, but free from the stifling certainty of the law. In Port Royal, a grizzled former gunner from your crew manages to slip away before the rope catches him. He changes his name, buys a small fishing boat, and spends his evenings nursing a mug of rum, telling wild stories to anyone who'll listen. The serpent tattoo on his arm fades with age, but his memory of the ship and the Brotherhood never does. He's seen too many friends go to the gallows, too many betrayals and last stands. He knows, better than most, that the world will never understand what truly drove men and women to piracy. Years pass. The children who watched your execution grow into adults, bearing both the cautionary tales and the secret envy whispered by their elders. Some become soldiers, some traders, a few even magistrates. But now and then, when the sea wind is strong and the moon is high, even the most respectable of them feel a pang of something wild and unnameable, a desire for freedom so fierce it almost aches. In the years that follow, pirates become less common. Trade is safer for a time. But as history proves over and over, the urge to seize what others own, to defy power, to live by one's own rules, this never vanishes. The legends you helped forge take on new life. Modern pirates, it turns out, aren't all that different from you. In the South China Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, on the digital frontiers of the 21st century, men and women still risk everything for a taste of unclaimed freedom. The flags may change. Now it's speedboats instead of sloops, ransomware instead of cutlasses, but the hunger is the same. Authority adapts, but so do those who yearn for something else. Historians look back, sifting through the stories, trying to draw lines between villain and rebel. Some call you the last gasp of a dying age. Others see you as the forebears of every dreamer who refuses to bend. Arguments rage in classrooms and on airwaves. Were the pirates heroes, freedom fighters, or simply thieves who happened to be unlucky? The answer, always, depends on who's telling the story and which part of the story they choose to believe. Books are written, films made, museums curated. School children dress as pirates for festivals, their plastic swords harmless, but their hearts briefly filled with the echo of real danger. Tourists flock to the sites where pirates once ruled, snapping photos under the blazing sun. Local guides offer tall tales for a few coins, adding your name to the long chain of buccaneers who will never quite disappear. And yet, even as you become part of the world's collective bedtime story, a shadow remains. In quiet moments, on midnight beaches, in candlelit studies, in the pauses between storms, someone remembers the articles, the code, the ragged democracy of the deck. They remember the sense that for a few fleeting years, ordinary people defied the rules and chose their own fate. Your legacy isn't in gold or blood, but in the idea that freedom is always within reach, always threatening the comfortable order of the world. You're a reminder that the difference between criminal and hero, pirate and patriot, is as shifting as the sea itself. So the world changes, but the story never really ends. It rolls forward, tide after tide, a whisper in the bones of anyone who ever wondered what it would mean to slip the leash, sail beyond the horizon, and call no man master. That is your true treasure, the echo of freedom passed on in story and song, as long as there are people brave or foolish, decades, then centuries. The gallows rot away, the courthouse sinks beneath hurricanes and earthquakes. The wharves where you were marched to judgment become nothing but sun-bleached planks beneath the feet of new generations. Even Port Royal itself is swallowed by the sea, part of it sliding into the waves in the great earthquake of 1692, as if the earth itself wanted to erase the memory of so much lawless freedom. But your legend endures. Long after the salt has faded from your bones, your story drifts through the Caribbean like a bit of song on the wind. People change, but the need for stories does not. Children gather at their grandparents' knees, wide-eyed as old men and women recount the tale of Mercy's Wane, and the pirates who chose the gallows over the collar, who died with a laugh rather than a grovel. Historians still argue in their libraries and lecture halls. Some, with brows furrowed over parchment and print, insist you were mere criminals, murderers who wrapped their greed in the flag of freedom. Others point to the code you lived by, the votes you took, the radical experiment of a democracy afloat on plunder and salt. They argue about numbers, about famous names. Anne Bonny, Black Sam, Charles Vane, Mary Read. They sift through the facts and the fables and never quite agree where villain ends and rebel begins. But out in the world, your legend is simpler and truer than any footnote. The lines between pirate, freedom fighter and outlaw have always blurred under the harsh Caribbean sun. In every age there are people who refuse to kneel, who risk the rope, the bullet or the jail cell rather than let another man hold the reins of their life. Sometimes you're remembered as a devil, sometimes as a hero, more often as both, because the truth is never tidy and the sea doesn't care for simple stories. As the centuries spin forward, the Caribbean itself changes. Pirates are replaced by planters, planters by merchants, merchants by tourists with cameras and broad hats. The great ports you knew, Nassau, Tortuga, Port Royal, are rebuilt, repainted, their wounds stitched up to look respectable. But late at night, when the cruise ships have sailed and the last rum punch has been poured, you can still hear the old songs. A stray guitar, a whispered toast, a bit of black cloth fluttering from a boat on the far horizon. The world at large forgets the texture of your life, but every now and then, in the quiet of a museum or in the hush before a hurricane, someone will stumble across a battered coin or a letter written in a spidery hand. They'll brush the dust away, and for a moment the past glimmers as bright as it did when you first grasped the rail and looked to the horizon, chasing not just gold, but the right to live as you wished. Your old shipmates vanish into their own legends. Some escape to distant ports, buy small plots of land, and disappear into the swirl of ordinary lives. Others die on the next job, or in the next crackdown, but always with a grin, a final joke, or a curse flung at the men who come to claim them. Their ghosts linger in every port where freedom was traded for coin, every cove where the law dared not tread. But perhaps the strangest thing is how your story never quite fades away. Over the years, the world invents new pirates, new rebels, new codes to live and die by. Highwaymen, revolutionaries, freedom fighters with different banners but the same hunger to be unowned. Every age finds its own outlaws and tells their story in your image, sometimes true, sometimes twisted, but always with that same electric charge. You become a symbol, an echo in songs, in stories, in the glint of adventure in a child's eyes. People start to dress as pirates for festivals, for plays, for films that reach millions. Your flag becomes a logo for football teams, for video games, for hackers waging digital wars in a world you'd barely recognize. In every telling, there's a spark of that old, dangerous hope, the belief that anyone might, just for a moment, break free of the world's chains. As the decades lengthen, scholars continue to debate what you meant. Were you a thief or a philosopher, a brute or a dreamer? Was your democracy a parody or a prophecy of revolutions yet to come? Their answers never quite settle. The records are too incomplete, the memories too slippery. But always, when they close their books and turn out the lights, they're left with that stubborn question: what if? What if a handful of people with nothing but nerve and a battered ship really could make the world tremble for a while? What if freedom, even when born in violence and chaos, is a kind of fire that keeps burning long after the ships are gone? In the modern world, the last pirates are rare, but the spirit remains. Off the coast of Somalia, in the shadow of tankers, a new breed of buccaneer chases the same fleeting liberty. In the digital wilds, rebels and outlaws find their own codes, their own enemies, their own myths. And always, always the idea persists: to live on your own terms, even if the cost is everything. And so, beneath the shifting stars you sail on, in memory and song, in the dreams of anyone who ever stared out at the horizon and wondered what might lie beyond. The sea is calm now. The echoes of cannon fire and the rattle of chains have faded, leaving only the hush of the tide steady and eternal. You stand once more on the deck of your old ship, not in body, but in memory, watching moonlight shimmer on the water, the night air soft with the scent of salt and distant storms. Let the past fall gently away, like coins trickling from an open hand. The world has moved on, yet the story you lived lingers quietly, a steady current beneath the waves of time. Every struggle, every laughter-soaked night, every oath sworn under the crack of the black flag has found its place in the long song of history. Nothing is truly lost, not the dreams, not the rebellion, not even the fear. They drift onward, like your ship, beyond the reach of kings and the passing of years. Tonight, as your breath slows and your eyes grow heavy, know that your story, like all the best legends, belongs to the world now. A whisper of freedom, a memory of wildness, a reminder that somewhere, even in the ordered world, a secret longing for the open sea endures. Let yourself drift. The horizon is endless. The night is deep and kind. You have lived, you have chosen, and you have left your mark in the salt and silence. So rest easy, sailor. The tide carries you home. Sweet dreams.